Today, for this presentation, Team 6 will be covering the disappearance of flight MH370 and how the national flag carrier of Malaysia managed this high-stakes crisis. First, we will explain why we chose this flight as our focus. Second, we will examine the crisis as it unfolded and the strategies employed in its management. Third, we will unpack how communication was orchestrated during this challenging time. And lastly, we will be proposing recommendations and mitigating strategies. So let's begin. The tragedy of flight MH370, which disappeared on March 8, 2014, was one of the most documented crises in history. Traveling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, the flight carrying 227 passengers and a crew of 12. There are many speculations on what happened, but our focus today will be on how the airline managed the crisis and not the reason for the disappearance of the plane. Malaysia Airlines, or MAS for short, prior to this tragedy was lauded as one of the safest passenger airlines in the region. This crisis is interesting to unpack because of two main points. First, its notable track record before the crisis boasted 2 decades without a significant accident, and the management of this crisis had an impact on their reputation. Second, as a national flag carrier, this incident wasn't just an airline crisis, it was a national concern. The airline's unique position, being both a profit-driven private entity and a government-backed public organization, further complicated the crisis management process. To understand the complexity, allow us to outline the timeline and the response taken by MAS for the first 24 hours and beyond.
Our journey through the MH370 disappearance begins on March 8, 2014 at 8:41 a.m. when the aircraft's transponder turned off, making it invisible to the radar. At 8:54, the last communication with the air traffic control happened. At 9:15, MAS declared an emergency, starting the search efforts. By 9:30, the aircraft disappeared from radar off Malaysia's coast. From March 9 to March 10, international searches in the radar area found no solid leads. On March 11, an official statement confirmed a presumed crash, shifting focus from rescue to recovery. On March 15, the search expanded to the South China Sea and Indian Ocean, revealing complex challenges. Subsequent years saw periods of suspension and resumption, with the last search ending in January 2020. The search ended without finding a resolution. Moving on to the next point, in the critical initial 24 hours of dealing with the crisis, here is what happened. First, dealing with the crisis was complicated by radar invisibility and conflicting information, triggering a global response. Initial search efforts focused on South China Sea, later expanding to the Indian Ocean, due to the lack of concrete evidence. Second, managing communication during the MH370 incident was marked by confusion, conflicting statements from Malaysian officials, and regrettable misstatements by the CEO of MAS, affecting public trust. Third, a crisis committee was formed to handle the crisis. Support, including accommodation, meals, and counseling services, was provided to affected families. The airline insurance company compensated victims' families with approximately $40 million, and the Prime Minister publicly apologized for the government's role in the crisis.
In managing the crisis past the first 24 hours, we analyzed how MAS behaved at the crisis stage based on the crisis management framework. Right after the disappearance occurred, MAS could immediately involve numerous countries in the search effort to understand the situation, which is thought to be effective to deal with the issue with a global scale. When responding to external stakeholders, however, MAS focused on finding the aircraft rather than communicating promptly and interactively. At the same time, while delayed in assistance, MAS offered mental and financial support for families of victims so that it can avoid further risks of rising complaints from them. Also, MAS surely followed the managed crisis response strategies to show its credibility, which was defined the previously established risk management plan. However, the approach of MAS has some issues which should be improved in the stage of both preparation and response for the crisis. In terms of preparation, it was not determined the policy that it should follow the industrial recommendations for information disclosure. As a result, there were delays in the disclosure compared to external expectations that invoked complaints. Moreover, unclear roles and responsibilities with other institutions would prevent them from working effectively. The airline seemed not to utilize daily press conferences the government conducted for the sake of information sharing. For its responsiveness, there was failure to keep the principle of over-responding as it deprioritized communication with stakeholders. There was also lack of compassionate attitude towards stakeholders, so there was a failure to understand the needs of stakeholders and clarify rising concerns and contradictions already stated.
In analyzing the communication, it is important to note that stakeholder management was extremely complex as a result of the various internal and external stakeholders identified above, with a need to carefully structure a communication plan unique to each stakeholder to effectively manage the crisis and maintain a level of trust. This was complicated by the different expectations and a further need to balance these expectations across. This further strained the effectiveness of the communication efforts. In the next slide, we assess how each stakeholder was managed by both MAS and the Malaysian government. MAS faced initial challenges in communication, causing reputable damage and a loss of employee trust due to opaque statements. A more effective approach would have entailed early implementation of a crisis communication plan, emphasizing clear and consistent messaging. Engaging employees in planning and offering support would have boosted morale. Externally, families of passengers experienced frustration due to inconsistent information from MAS and the government, leading to speculation. Enhanced strategies would have included a dedicated family communication center, scheduled updates, family liaison officers, and a transparent communication from the start. Global media and the public pressured MAS and the government, resulting in sensationalism due to limited official updates. Official communication platforms like websites, press releases, and social media could have steered media towards responsible reporting and combating misinformation. Aviation, travel, and tourism stakeholders suffered from inadequate communication due to competitiveness. Mechanisms for sharing information without compromising competition would have facilitated a united response. Internationally, MAS and the government faced criticism for inconsistent statements, hindering coordination. A centralized communication hub, coordinated briefings, and early international collaboration could have improved government communication and restored stakeholders' trust. Implementing these measures could have enhanced crisis management and stakeholder trust for MAS and the Malaysian government.
After analyzing the crisis management and communication, here is our suggested mitigation plan and conclusion with some lessons hard learned. First, establishing a clear command structure with the relevant authorities and the stakeholders, such as Malaysian government, the airlines, the search and rescue team, and the families of the passengers. Second, communicating frequently and transparently with all stakeholders, providing accurate and updated information, acknowledging uncertainty and gaps, and addressing rumors. Third, provide timely and compassionate support to the families of the passengers, especially psychological counseling and legal advice. Fourth, coordinating with international communities with transparency, sharing data and resources, and respecting each other's sovereignty. Finally, preventive measures to enhance aviation safety and security. In conclusion, such a crisis highlighted the need of a more effective and coordinated response. The main challenges faced by the crisis team were the lack of reliable information, the high public expectation, the diverse and conflicting interests of the stakeholders, and the technical difficulties of search operation. Some of the best practices emerged from the crisis were establishing joint investigation team, the adoption of consensus-based decision-making process, the involvement of civil society group and volunteers. Some of the areas that need improvement are standardization of protocols and procedures, the enhancement of communication and collaboration, the development contingency plans, scenarios, and evaluating of performance and accountability. In look at the crisis up close, we take away valuable lessons and blueprint of both the strengths to uphold and vulnerabilities to address in crisis response. Thank you.